Well, for more on COP15 and this historic agreement, I am joined by Changhua Wu. She is CEO of the Beijing Future Innovation Center and Executive Director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. Thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's first talk about the significance of this monumental agreement. How important is this and will this be in protecting diversity around the world? And break it down for us. Why is this relevant for us in our daily lives?
It is significant because we all recognize what a crisis we've been living in already. And if you look at all the scientific studies and assessment from UN and other organizations, literally we are driving at least 1 million species actually to extinction in the coming decades if we do not halt and reverse the trend. In the meantime, we also recognize due the practice and common knowledge there as well, if we take actions versus if we restore 50% of the currently damaged critical ecosystems there, we'll be able to dramatically reduce up to 60% of the current species extinctions there. So science, evidence, and experience already on the table, so that we'll be able to really take actions, particularly now clustered or convened by the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to moving forward the agenda to reset the relationship between man and nature. In that, as we were talking about here today, there are a few major highlights actually demonstrated or included, enshrined in the current framework. One is really the level of ambition. And this 30 by 30 goal is solidly enshrined into the new framework by 2030. So we have a major goal to aim for globally, collectively at this moment. In the meantime, we all recognize in order to deliver the ambition, we need actions, we need a means of implementations. Very encouragingly, we started to see on the financial side, and more and more countries, particularly from developed countries and also some from developing countries on a voluntary basis, to really contribute in the financing to the global process. For instance, by 2030, there's something called, this $700 billion we need to mobilize every year. $200 billion need to be raised, and the other $500 billion we need to address, mostly from removing or reforming the current.
I'm sorry, if I could interrupt a little bit here. I just want to be able to get through some of the other issues as well. If I could also talk about the role of China in this. Nathan's story right before talked about this. China being the host and its role in being able to create a consensus among all the participants and striking a middle ground, and that could not be easy with all these participants and all these countries involved.
That's never been an easy process, particularly for the UN international climate or environmental governance process. So COP15 at Montreal sort of repeated that sort of model. And very importantly, it takes the expertise, the skillfulness, and also level of sophistication in order to drive a sort of successful outcome there. I think the Chinese presidency of COP15 at Montreal has further demonstrated its capability to do so. Without that, the global process will potentially, collapsing and will be totally lost and continuing to be in the down spiral sort of a slide into further damage, of nature, and which will threaten our human sustainability or survival on this planet there.
Well, a previous 10-year agreement on biodiversity did not completely achieve a single target on a global scale. So now the question is, how is this new pact going to be different? How are we going to hold all these countries accountable for this? I think that's the big question here.
Absolutely. I think the success tells us, like we've learned from the lessons in the previous decade there, the IT, 20 targets there, even though, yes, we failed probably on all of them, but somehow their progress is made here and there. So it's not only a lesson learned in terms of how to develop a more meaningful, sort of global process, but in the meantime, we need to learn from practice there as well. A few key lessons I think we learned through that process. One, we really need to make sure the level of ambition is there. So that's why 30 by 30 becomes so important, critical for this coming decade actually to reset the global, human relationship with nature. In the meantime, if you look at the means of implementation in particular, we didn't really have really clear clarity around the financing in particular to deliver those agenda. Now we have that in the current framework now. In the meantime, if you look at liability, accountability issue, there was not sort of we call it MRV, monitoring, verification, reporting process element. Now we have that as well. And in the meantime, I think the level, the depth of knowledge of understanding the threats to nature and also the root causes there, for that damage, now we learn much better than the previous decade. And those elements are all now included, covered in the current framework, so that we'll be able to address the issues in an integrated and systematic manner.
Thank you so much. Wish we had more time with you. Changhua Wu, thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you.